when there is a concern that either those risks have not been properly assessed, or indeed those weapons are being used in violation of international humanitarian law, then our own laws say that we should not be providing those weapons.
Right.
And I would submit there have been so many cases, Asma, so many cases over the last few months, demonstrably, where those laws have been violated in terms of how the weapons have been used, that we should have stopped providing weapons a long time ago.
A group of former military leaders and diplomats are calling on the government to stop selling arms to Israel. They say that UK-made components are being used to violate international law. The UK has licensed nearly £500 million in military exports to Israel since 2015. One of those who signed the letter is General Sir John Deverell, ex-NATO Commander-in-Chief Allied Forces Northern Europe, who also led operations in the Palestinian territories. And we can speak to him now. Good morning to you.
Asma, good morning. I just want to correct something. I actually was a former brigadier, but you're right in saying I was a senior British officer in Palestinian territories. Deverell seems to have become quite a common name, so just to make sure we get our facts right.
Oh, right.
But thank you so much for having me on. No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. How did this letter originate? And were you hesitant at all? Or was this something you thought, absolutely, I want to put my name to this?
Oh, very strongly. We've been talking about this for a long time, Asma. And the point being that this is late in the day. We know from the history of this ghastly war that assurances and words have not had the effect that they've been intended. And Canada and Holland have led the way in terms of stopping arms exports. And we have already, I would submit, been breaking our own laws and international laws in terms of providing arms exports for exporting weapons components to Israel. And of course, in an ideal world, this would have some leverage in terms of getting the Israelis to stop fighting, certainly if the Americans did it. The Americans historically, Asma, have stopped weapons exports on a few occasions to Israel. And on some occasions, that's led straight away to a cessation of fighting. And we're seeking both to make sure that we stay within our own law and also to bring some pressure to bear as well, even though one might say it's tokenism because it's quite a small amount of weapons we export, but it does matter very much. It's more than just symbolism.
So if October the 7th hadn't happened, if the operations into Gaza hadn't happened, you would be happy for us to continue supplying arms to Israel?
Well, the way that it works, Asma, is that the government by law, by our own laws, is required to assess the risk of any weapons it provides to any overseas state in terms of those weapons possibly being used in violation of international humanitarian law, otherwise known as the law of armed conflict. And when there is a concern that either those risks have not been properly assessed, or indeed those weapons are being used in violation of international humanitarian law, then our own laws say that we should not be providing those weapons.
Right.
And I would submit there have been so many cases, Asma, so many cases over the last few months, demonstrably, where those laws have been violated in terms of how the weapons have been used, that we should have stopped providing weapons a long time ago.
Like when?
Well, I would say that in the early days, one could see the effects of the ways that the Israeli Defense Forces were waging war, essentially using conventional warfighting methods in a very constricted space, not holding their soldiers and their officers to account in terms of when mistakes were made, and not carrying out their target accurately enough, and also not using smart weapons enough, using too many dumb weapons. And so if you look at the early days, even within the first month, the numbers of those killed in terms of innocent civilians, including women and children, exceeded the total of casualties during Ukraine, and even really well-known examples in the Second World War, such as the bombing of Dresden. And so we should have done this months and months ago. And of course, the other thing, Asma, the British government has been here before. In the High Court in 2017, the British government lost the case about exporting weapons to Saudi Arabia for use in Yemen because, again, of civilian casualties there, which should have been avoided. We lost the case. So it's not the first time that we're likely to find ourselves in court.
Now, of course, we've put these allegations of breaking international law to the Israeli government and to the IDF many times before, and they've always said that they don't accept that. Is there a difference here? You talked about Saudi Arabia. We're talking about a particular terrorist attack where terrorists crossed a border into a country. 1,000 people, more than 1,000 people died, 200 people taken hostage, many of whom are still hostage. Does that make this? I'm not saying that means that international law should be broken, but does that make that slightly different to the example that you quoted there?
By no means. The point is, if we descend to the level of the terrorists in terms of what we do, then we're already losing the war. And the danger is, even in the unlikely event that the Israeli Defense Forces, in inverted commas, win this battle, the danger is that they will lose the war. And the point being that the rules are the rules. And from my own experience, having both written for Number 10 and for the Chief of Defence Staff, after the British government was held to account and lost the case, going back to the weapons to Saudi Arabia. And I wrote this model process as to how we could avoid this happening again. And from my own experience, again, having been president of a court martial where we held to account British soldiers for relatively mild abuse of Iraqi civilians in 2003, those soldiers were sent to prison, dismissed the service, and again, the officers were held to account and had their promotion stopped, and a number of them left the army. So the point is, if the Israelis were really serious about saying that they hold their soldiers responsible, we would have seen many more examples of court martials which tend to be in the public sphere. We've seen none of that holding to account. And so going back to your question, Asma, in the first place, no, we hold ourselves to a better standard than the terrorists, and that should indeed be the case for the Israeli Defense Forces.
I asked you at the beginning of the interview if you had any hesitation in signing this letter, and you said no. What do you expect the kind of reaction, consequences of signing this kind of letter to be in terms of people getting in touch with you? Because it is obviously a very, very polarizing situation.
Well, it shouldn't be really, because as I say, the laws are the laws. We need to treat people properly. There should be due respect and a high priority for the humanity of people who are suffering. Over 100,000 dead and injured. The facts speak for themselves. And our own Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, has already been talking about the possibility of our stopping our weapons exports. He is talking about it in terms of the leverage that might provide in terms of getting the Israelis to open up much more about providing humanitarian support. We're saying, in addition to that, very importantly, we're breaking our own laws, and the British government will find itself in the dock. And what we would like to think is the Americans also, who have been talking about it at some senior levels on and off, should also consider this, because the Americans have stopped weapons before the Israelis. And the point is, if people don't behave properly with those weapons, then that is what should happen. To create the space for the talks, for everything else that needs to happen, humanitarian support. Otherwise, this could drag on, and the numbers we could see, Asma, in the future will be absolutely catastrophic. And Israel, for whom we all care deeply, will suffer in the long term as a result of that.